The Gathering Storm. Chapter 1, The Gathering Storm. Spain, 1490. The edge of war. The sun hung low over the Andalusian hills, casting long shadows over the scorched earth. Smoke curled from distant villages, remnants of the latest Spanish advance into Moorish lands. The Reconquista had raged for centuries, but now, with the Christian kingdoms of Castile and Aragon closing in on Granada, the final chapter of Al-Andalus was being written in fire and steel. Don Alejandro de Velasco. Don Alejandro de Velasco reined in his stallion atop a ridge, surveying the valley below. The aftermath of battle was a sight he had grown used to, but never one he could stomach. Bodies lay scattered across the field, both Christian and Moorish alike, their blood mingling in the dry dust. His men, soldiers of Castile, moved through the wreckage, collecting weapons and dragging prisoners toward the camp. Alejandro should have felt victorious. Another village taken, another step toward securing Christian rule. But all he felt was exhaustion. The war had stretched on for too many years, and the glory promised to young knights like himself had long since faded. Now, there was only duty, and the weight of it pressed heavily upon his shoulders. A rider approached, his second in command, Captain Esteban Ordonez. "We've secured the village, my lord," Esteban reported, his voice brisk. "No resistance left?" Alejandro nodded, though the words felt hollow. "And the civilians?" "Most fled before we arrived. A few remained, mostly the old and the stubborn." Esteban hesitated. "Some were uncooperative." Alejandro's jaw clenched. He knew what that meant. He had no illusions about what war turned men into. "See that they are treated fairly," he ordered. Esteban raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He knew better than to question his commander's sense of honor, even if he found it naive. As the sun dipped lower, Alejandro turned his horse toward the village, unaware that his path was about to cross with someone who would change his fate forever. Zaira bint Tariq. Zaira bint Tariq crouched in the ruins of an abandoned house, her breath shallow, her fingers tightening around the hilt of the dagger at her belt. The Christian soldiers had come faster than expected, sweeping through the countryside with ruthless efficiency. She should have left days ago, but she had stayed behind to gather herbs for the wounded in her caravan. Now, her people had fled without her, and she was trapped behind enemy lines. Beside her, her younger brother, Yusuf, no more than 12, clung to her sleeve. His dark eyes, wide with fear, searched her face for reassurance she did not have. "We will find a way out," she whispered in Arabic, her voice steady even as her heart pounded. Through the cracks in the wooden slats, she watched the Spanish soldiers move through the village. Some looted what little remained. Others dragged prisoners from their hiding places. Zaira's grip on her dagger tightened. She had trained for this. She was not just a healer, she was a warrior. The daughter of a general who had fought to hold back the Christian tide. But even warriors knew when they were outmatched. If she fought now, Yusuf would die. And she would not let that happen. Footsteps neared the door. A soldier's shadow loomed against the wall. Zaira braced herself, preparing to strike. The door swung open. And there, standing framed by the last light of the dying sun, was a man unlike the others. His armor gleamed, not with the crude hunger of a conqueror, but with something else. Something colder. He had the bearing of a noble, yet his eyes held the weight of a man who had seen too much death. Don Alejandro de Velasco. Their eyes met. And in that single moment, everything changed. Chapter 2, A Deal with the Enemy. A moment of choice. Zaira stood motionless, her dagger hidden in the folds of her robe, her heart pounding in her chest. Don Alejandro de Velasco had spared her life, an act she did not expect from a Spanish knight. But now, his offer hung in the air like a blade between them. "Come with me," he had said. "For now." The words were simple, but the implications were dangerous. Trusting a Christian nobleman was madness. His people had burned villages, slaughtered families, and driven her own into exile. And yet, Zaira knew that if she refused, she and Yusuf would not survive the night. Her gaze flickered to her brother. The boy was trembling, trying to appear brave. He was the only reason she had not already lunged for Alejandro's throat. Zaira lifted her chin. "I will go with you," she said. "But only until I find a way to escape." Alejandro's lips curled into a wry smile. "I expected nothing less." The Spanish camp. The ride to the Spanish encampment was silent. Zaira sat stiffly behind Alejandro on his horse, every muscle in her body coiled like a spring. Yusuf rode with a younger soldier, his arms wrapped tightly around the man's waist. When they arrived, the camp sprawled before them, rows of tents, campfires flickering, men sharpening swords or tending to the wounded. The air smelled of burning wood, sweat, and metal. Alejandro dismounted first, offering Zaira a hand. She ignored it, slipping down on her own. "You will stay here," Alejandro said, leading them to a small tent near the outskirts. "You'll be treated as a guest, not a prisoner, as long as you don't give my men a reason to think otherwise." Zaira folded her arms. "A guest in the lion's den is still a prisoner." Alejandro gave her a long, measured look. "Prisoners do not get to negotiate. But you and I, we may have something to offer each other." She narrowed her eyes. "What do you mean?" Alejandro hesitated before speaking. "My sister. She was taken in a Moorish raid months ago. If she is still alive, she is in Granada." Zaira's breath caught. Granada. The last stronghold of her people. Alejandro continued, his voice quieter now. "Help me find her. And in return, I will help you and your brother reach safety." Zaira let his words settle. She did not trust him. But she needed him. And he, for whatever reason, needed her too. "Finally," she said, "you are a fool to trust me." Alejandro's mouth twitched into a half-smile. "So they tell me." She held out her hand. "Then we have a deal." For the first time, Don Alejandro de Velasco and Zaira bint Tariq shook hands not as enemies, but as uneasy allies. For now. Chapter 3, Shadows and Secrets. A dangerous path. The Spanish camp was restless before dawn, the low murmur of men preparing for travel filling the air. Horses snorted, soldiers strapped on armor, and the scent of damp earth mixed with the dying embers of the previous night's fires. Inside the small tent, Zaira tightened the straps of her leather bracers, her movements precise. Every instinct screamed at her to run. She was surrounded by enemies, trapped in the heart of a war that had stolen everything from her. Yet here she was, about to leave on a journey alongside a Spanish knight. She glanced at Yusuf, still half asleep as he rubbed his eyes. The boy trusted her to keep him safe. That was all that mattered. Alejandro's voice cut through the morning quiet. "We ride soon." Zaira turned to see him standing at the entrance of the tent. Even without his polished armor, he looked every bit the noble warrior, his sword strapped to his waist, his dark hair slightly tousled by the wind. "I am ready," she said simply. Alejandro studied her, as if measuring the truth in her words. Then he nodded. "Let's move." The road to Granada. The group set out before sunrise, a small company of riders moving swiftly over the hills. Alejandro had chosen only a handful of men to accompany them. Too many would attract attention, too few would leave them vulnerable. Zaira rode beside him, her keen eyes scanning the horizon. Every path, every ridge, was a place where danger could lurk. "You know these lands," Alejandro noted, watching the way she observed their surroundings. "I have walked them since childhood," she replied. "Unlike you, I was not carried on horseback through them." Alejandro smirked. "You assume much about me." Zaira turned to him, her gaze sharp. "Do I? You are a nobleman, raised in castles, taught to see my people as enemies. You fight for a kingdom that would erase mine. His smirk faded. And what of you? You were not raised in battle, yet you wield a dagger like a trained warrior. You despise my kind, yet you ride at my side. Tell me, Lady Zaira, how did you become what you are? Zaira stiffened. Few had ever asked her that question. Fewer still had lived long enough to hear the answer. My father was a general of Granada, she said at last. He believed loyalty would protect him. He was wrong. Alejandro did not press further, though he recognized the pain in her voice. He understood betrayal far too well. The silence between them stretched, filled only by the rhythm of hoofbeats against the dirt path. An oath tested. By midday, they reached the ruins of an abandoned village. Smoke still lingered in the air, though the fires had long since burned out. Alejandro dismounted first, scanning the destruction. One of ours or yours? Zaira dismounted as well, walking through the charred remains of homes. Does it matter? Alejandro sighed. No, it did not. A rustling sound made them both freeze. Zaira's hand went to her dagger, Alejandro's to his sword. From behind a crumbling wall, a wounded Moorish soldier stumbled forward, blood staining his tunic. His eyes locked onto Alejandro, and in an instant, he lunged, blade flashing. Alejandro reacted swiftly, sidestepping the attack and disarming the man in a single motion. Before he could strike back, Zaira stepped between them, her dagger at the ready. Enough, she snapped, holding out a hand toward the fallen soldier. She spoke in Arabic, her tone firm. You cannot win this fight. The soldier's breath was ragged, his gaze flicking between her and Alejandro. Why do you protect him? He spat. Zaira hesitated. Why indeed? He is useful to me, she said at last. And killing him will not bring back what we have lost. The soldier's grip on his weapon loosened. Alejandro watched the exchange carefully. He did not understand all the words, but he understood Zaira's intent. Slowly, the Moorish warrior lowered his blade. Alejandro did the same. Zaira exhaled. Go, she ordered. Before the others find you. The soldier hesitated for only a moment before vanishing into the ruins. Alejandro turned to her. You let him go. Zaira met his gaze. Would you rather I had let him kill you? Alejandro considered that. Then he chuckled. I suppose I should thank you. Don't, she said, sheathing her dagger. We are not allies, Alejandro. We are only using each other. He smirked. So you keep telling yourself. Zaira ignored him and mounted her horse. They rode on, shadows of the past trailing close behind. Chapter 4, A Dance of Lies. The Gates of Granada. The sun was setting by the time Alejandro and Zaira reached the outskirts of Granada. The city's great walls loomed ahead, their smooth stone reflecting the last light of the day. Guards patrolled the battlements, their dark silhouettes standing against the fiery sky. Alejandro pulled his horse to a stop at the edge of a ridge overlooking the valley below. From here, they could see the winding roads leading to the city, the markets closing for the evening, the minarets rising like sentinels over the rooftops. Zaira's breath caught. Home. Or at least, what was left of it. Alejandro studied her. Do you still have allies here? She hesitated before answering. Perhaps. He arched an eyebrow. That is not reassuring. She turned to him, her gaze unreadable. Granada is not like your cities, Alejandro. Loyalty shifts like desert sands. Some will remember me. Some will wish me dead. Alejandro nodded. He understood power struggles well enough. So how do we get inside? He asked. Zaira glanced at Yusuf, who had fallen asleep against her side. She brushed a strand of hair from his forehead, her expression softening. We will not sneak in like thieves, she said. We will walk through the gates. Alejandro frowned. They will recognize me as a Spaniard. Zaira smirked. Not if you do as I say. A change of identity. An hour later, Alejandro barely recognized himself. Gone was the polished armor, the nobleman's cloak, the insignia of Castile. Instead, he wore a simple brown robe, his sword hidden beneath the folds. Zaira had wrapped a dark scarf around his head, leaving only his eyes visible. You look almost convincing, she murmured as she adjusted the fabric. Alejandro glanced at her, his expression dry. Almost. She gave him a small, amused smile. Try to look less like a man who thinks he owns the world. Alejandro smirked but said nothing. Zaira had also changed. Her travel-worn cloak was replaced with a simple, dark dress, and she carried herself with the ease of someone who belonged. Yusuf, now clutching a small basket, played the part of an innocent child following his sister. As they approached the city gates, Alejandro forced himself to remain calm. The guards were Moorish, their curved scimitars gleaming under the torches. One of them stepped forward, eyeing Zaira. What is your business in Granada? Zaira met his gaze without hesitation. I return home with my brother. The guard's eyes flickered to Alejandro. And the man? She tilted her chin. My husband. Alejandro nearly choked. The guard raised an eyebrow. A foreigner. A traitor from the north, she said smoothly. Times are hard. We go where we must. The guard frowned, glancing at Alejandro once more. Then, with a grunt, he stepped aside. Go. But cause no trouble. Zaira led them through the gates without looking back. Alejandro followed, barely concealing his amusement. Once they were safely inside, he leaned close and whispered, Your husband. Zaira smirked. It was the most believable lie. Alejandro chuckled. You enjoy this, don't you? She glanced at him sideways. A little. A city of spies. Granada was alive with sound and movement. Street vendors called out their final prices, the scent of roasted lamb and spiced wine drifting through the air. Lanterns illuminated the winding alleyways, casting golden light on the white walls of the buildings. But beneath the city's vibrant energy, tension simmered. The people of Granada knew their kingdom was dying. Alejandro felt the weight of eyes on them. He was used to moving through enemy territory, but this was different. Here, he was a ghost in a city that would not welcome him if it knew the truth. Zaira moved with practiced ease, leading them through the maze-like streets. She stopped at a modest house near the outskirts, knocking 3 times on the wooden door. After a pause, the door creaked open. A woman with sharp eyes and silver-streaked hair peered out. Zaira, the woman whispered, shock evident in her voice. Hello, Aunt Farida, Zaira said softly. The older woman pulled her inside before glancing at Alejandro and Yusuf. And them? Zaira hesitated. They are with me. Farida studied Alejandro with suspicion. Then we have much to discuss. Alejandro nodded, stepping into the house. Inside the walls of Granada, the game had truly begun. Chapter 5, The Web of Deception. A familiar face. The door shut behind them with a quiet finality, sealing Alejandro inside an unfamiliar world. The house was modest, its walls lined with woven tapestries, the air heavy with the scent of jasmine and spices. Farida moved quickly, locking the door before turning to Zaira. You should not have come back, she said, her voice a harsh whisper. Zaira squared her shoulders. I had no choice. Farida's sharp gaze flickered to Alejandro. And you bring a Spaniard into my home. Zaira hesitated, but Alejandro spoke first. I am not your enemy. Farida gave him a cold smile. Oh? Then why does a Castilian noble skulk through Granada like a common thief? Alejandro did not flinch. I am here for my sister. She was taken in a raid. Farida's expression did not change. Many have been taken in this war. Why should I care for yours? Zaira stepped forward. Because I am asking. A tense silence stretched between them. Then, with a sigh, Farida rubbed her temples. You always had a way of making trouble, child. Zaira smirked. And you always had a way of getting me out of it. Farida exhaled, then gestured toward the cushions lining the floor. Sit. If we are to speak of dangerous things, we should do it comfortably. The price of information. Alejandro sat cautiously, still aware of how out of place he was. Yusuf curled beside Zaira, already drifting into sleep, his small hands clutching the fabric of her dress. Farida poured tea from a brass pot, her movements slow and deliberate. What do you know of your sister's fate? She asked Alejandro. Very little, he admitted. Only that she was taken in a Moorish raid months ago. I believe she is still in Granada. Farida sipped her tea. There are many prisoners here, some ransomed, some enslaved, others used as bargaining pieces. She studied him. What is she worth to you? Alejandro met her gaze without hesitation. Everything. Farida hummed in thought. There is a man who may know, she said at last. Abu Sakir. He deals in secrets and trades in human lives. If your sister is here, he would know her price. Alejandro leaned forward. Where can I find him? Farida's lips curled in amusement. Not so fast, Spaniard. Abu Sakir does not meet with just anyone. And he does not give information freely. Zaira set her cup down. Then we must give him something he values. Farida nodded. Or become something he desires. Alejandro frowned. What do you mean? Farida's gaze flickered to Zaira. Abu Sakir has always had an interest in our dear girl. Zaira's expression darkened. No. Farida raised an eyebrow. Do you have a better plan? Alejandro looked between them. What does he want with you? Zaira's jaw tightened. Abu Sakir profits from war. He once sought to make me part of his collection. Alejandro's hands clenched into fists. And you would go to him? Zaira's voice was cold. I would do what must be done. Farida studied them both before sighing. Then you will need disguises again. Abu Sakir hosts a gathering tomorrow night. If you wish to meet him, you will have to enter his world. Alejandro exhaled slowly. The plan was reckless. Dangerous. But they had no choice. A silent oath. Later that night, as Zaira prepared a bed for Yusuf, Alejandro stepped beside her. You don't have to do this, he murmured. Zaira didn't look at him. Yes, I do. Alejandro hesitated. If he tries anything. She turned to him then, her expression unreadable. I have faced worse men than Abu Sakir. Alejandro's jaw tightened. Still. A flicker of something passed between them, understanding, perhaps, or something deeper. Then, quietly, Zaira said, Thank you. Alejandro nodded, saying nothing. Tomorrow, they would step into the lion's den. And neither of them would emerge unchanged. Chapter 6, Into the Lion's Den. A Masked Deception. The palace of Abu Sakir gleamed under the moonlight, a fortress of excess hidden within the heart of Granada. Intricate lanterns cast golden light over the courtyard, where nobles, merchants, and war profiteers gathered beneath silk-draped canopies. Laughter and music echoed in the air, blending with the scent of spiced wine and roasted lamb. Alejandro adjusted the deep blue robe draped over his shoulders, the fine embroidery disguising him as a wealthy foreign trader. His sword remained hidden beneath the folds, but he felt its weight like a promise. Beside him, Zaira was transformed. Gone was the hardened warrior tonight, she moved like a queen among jackals. Her deep red dress clung to her frame, embroidered with gold thread that caught the candle light. A delicate veil obscured the lower half of her face, leaving only her sharp, dark eyes exposed. Alejandro leaned close. I see now why Abu Sakir was interested. Zaira smirked beneath the veil. Try to act like I belong here, not like you want to kill everyone in sight. He exhaled, forcing himself to relax. No promises. A game of power. Inside, the palace was a maze of excess rooms filled with silk cushions, jeweled goblets overflowing with wine, and low murmurs of whispered deals. At the far end of the grand hall, Abu Sakir lounged upon a cushioned divan. He was an older man, his beard streaked with silver, his robes rich with embroidered patterns. His dark eyes scanned the room like a merchant assessing his wares. Zaira stepped forward, and Abu Sakir's gaze immediately landed on her. Well, he said, his voice like honeyed poison. The desert wind brings me an unexpected gift. Zaira lowered her gaze just slightly, a practiced sign of respect, but not submission. It has been some time, my lord. Abu Sakir's smile widened. I had thought you lost to the war. His gaze flickered to Alejandro. And you come with a companion. An interesting choice. Alejandro met his stare without flinching. I am here for business. Abu Sakir laughed. A man who wastes no time with pleasantries. I admire that. He gestured to the cushions before him. Sit. Drink. And tell me what you seek. Zaira and Alejandro obeyed, each settling onto the floor with the grace of those accustomed to dangerous company. Zaira spoke first. We need information. Abu Sakir chuckled. Information is a currency more valuable than gold. And it is never given freely. Alejandro leaned forward. Then name your price. Abu Sakir's gaze flickered back to Zaira, his smile deepening. Ah, but the price is obvious, is it not? Zaira's muscles tensed, though she kept her expression neutral. Surely a man of your wealth desires more than an old interest. Abu Sakir laughed again, clearly enjoying himself. Perhaps. But there is something you can offer me, Zaira. He sipped his wine, then said, a favor. A simple one. Alejandro's grip tightened on his goblet. What favor? Abu Sakir's eyes gleamed. There is a man, one who has betrayed me. He walks freely in this city, thinking himself untouchable. I wish to see him, removed. Alejandro's jaw clenched. An assassination. Zaira's voice was calm. Who is he? Abu Sakir leaned back, clearly savoring the moment. A Castilian officer. One of your enemies, Don Alejandro. Silence fell between them. Alejandro exhaled slowly. And if we do this? Abu Sakir smiled. Then I will tell you what you wish to know. A dangerous bargain. Outside the palace, beneath the cool night sky, Alejandro paced in the shadow of an olive tree. We should not do this. Zaira watched him, arms crossed. If we do not, we will never find your sister. Alejandro turned to her. You would kill a man on Abu Sakir's orders. She hesitated. I would kill a man to save an innocent. Wouldn't you? Alejandro ran a hand through his hair. Damn it. Zaira stepped closer. You do not have to do this. I will handle it. Alejandro met her gaze. No. If blood is to be spilled, it will not be yours alone. Zaira studied him for a moment, then nodded. They had entered the lion's den. And now, they would have to play the game to survive.